This didn't happen years ago, or in some vague past. It was barely a month ago. I'm a senior in high school, and I've lived in Nevada my whole life. Out here, there's not much going on. No big city lights, no endless parties. So my friends and I, we had to make our own kind of fun. For us, that meant exploring places that time had already forgotten. Old buildings with busted windows, service tunnels no one uses anymore, half-dead shopping malls. The creepier, the better. We weren't out there breaking things or tagging walls. It wasn't about that. It was about the atmosphere. That thrill of walking where you weren't supposed to, where silence pressed in from all sides, where every sound made your chest tighten.
In our group, there was one guy who always found the strangest, darkest places. Charles. Quiet, mysterious. The type of guy who would scroll past the normal stuff and somehow dig up locations nobody had ever heard of. Half the time, I didn't even want to know how he found them. Then, one night, he sent us something different. A screenshot. Some random Instagram account. Barely any followers, blurry photos that made your stomach twist, and comments that felt off. The post was simple. Dozens of abandoned mine shafts in the Mojave Desert if you know where to look. Charles didn't just scroll past it. He reached out. Whoever was behind that account gave him a few rough spots to check. That was all Charles needed to hear. He became obsessed, and by the weekend, the plan was set.
It was me, Charles, and our other friend, James. I had a Wrangler that could handle off-road driving, so I was the one behind the wheel. No exact address, no clear directions. Just a single pin on a map dropped deep in the middle of the Mojave. The farther we drove, the less it felt like a road at all. We had turned off the highway at least 30 minutes earlier, and now the dirt trail under us was barely a path anymore. Nothing around us but endless desert. And that's when the air in the Jeep started to feel heavier, like we weren't just heading out into the desert, but into something we shouldn't find.
We had been driving for what felt like forever, the desert stretching out like an endless ocean of sand and stone. No signs of life, no landmarks, just silence and the crunch of tires on dirt. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew there was no signal. In the back, James was losing his patience, saying Charles had dragged us out here for nothing, that it was all some online prank. But Charles didn't flinch. Calm and stubborn, he kept telling us to push on. I gave in, figuring a few more minutes wouldn't hurt. Then, just as frustration peaked, James shouted and pointed to the right. At first, it looked like more rock, another trick of the fading light. But as we rolled closer, my stomach dropped. It was a half-collapsed wooden frame built into the slope, jagged beams like broken ribs, with a dark hole gaping behind them. A mine shaft, old, forgotten, waiting. The Jeep went silent. Charles calmly pulled out his phone, dropped a pin, and whispered, "Told you." James scoffed, calling it luck, but I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my spine. Out of endless nothing, we had found something real, something that maybe should have stayed buried. I pulled the Jeep onto a flat patch of dirt and killed the engine. We grabbed our gear, and Charles even handed us masks like he'd been planning this forever. The closer we got, the worse it looked. The wooden frame was splintered, the opening nothing but a black mouth gaping at us. Charles bent down, picked up a rock, and tossed it inside. We stood there, waiting. 1 second, 2, then 3 sharp clangs echoed from below before the sound just vanished. That silence was heavier than the desert air. Charles smirked and said if any of us slipped, we wouldn't be coming back up. My throat went dry. Still, we followed him in. The shaft wasn't a straight drop, but the slope was steep enough to make every step feel like a gamble. The dirt crumbled under our boots, the old wooden beams groaned as we brushed past them, and with every foot deeper, the air grew colder, the silence thicker. Soon, the faint glow from the entrance was gone, swallowed by the dark. My heartbeat was the only sound in my ears as we finally reached what felt like the bottom, a place so still it didn't seem like it should exist. The shaft leveled out into a wider tunnel that split in several directions. It looked like something out of an old ghost story. Rotting beams holding the walls, rusted rails half buried in dirt, and a thick layer of dust on everything. Bits of wood and metal lay scattered around, maybe from carts or tools left behind long ago. The air was stale and bitter, and that's when I realized how useful the masks really were. We picked one tunnel and started walking. None of us spoke. Even James stayed quiet, his usual complaints gone. We weren't looking for treasure, just exploring. But the deeper we went, the more empty and wrong it felt. Like everything of value had been stripped away, leaving only shadows and silence. We had just about given up when a sound cut through the silence. At first, it was faint, buried somewhere deeper in the tunnel, like something heavy scraping against the ground. I thought it was my imagination until I saw Charles freeze mid-step, his face pale in the glow of his flashlight. James quickly motioned for us to turn the lights off, and within seconds we were swallowed by total darkness. My chest tightened as we stood there, listening. The sound came again, slow, dragging, like metal or wood being pulled along the dirt. The echo made it impossible to know where it was coming from, but it felt closer with every second. We waited in that blackness, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, though it felt like forever.
The scraping grew louder, steady, almost purposeful. Then, in the worst possible moment, James fumbled and his flashlight flicked on for a split second before going dark again. My stomach dropped. I wanted to strangle him right there. The scraping noise stopped. The tunnel went dead silent, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then it hit us. A deafening metallic clang echoing from the depths, followed by a scream so raw and twisted it barely sounded human. It ripped through the tunnel like a nightmare made real, and in that instant, I knew we were not alone down there. The moment that scream echoed, we bolted. None of us cared about the noise. We just ran, our footsteps exploding through the tunnel. I've never run faster in my life. My chest ached, breath burning, but all I could hear was the pounding behind us, footsteps that didn't belong to us, chasing closer. I was the last one, trying to keep up, when my foot caught on something and I went down hard. One shoe ripped off, but there was no time to grab it. I scrambled up, dirt tearing into my bare foot, and kept going. Up ahead, Charles and James were already climbing the incline. I hurled myself at it, clawing and slipping, each step driving splinters deeper into my skin. The pain was brutal, but fear kept me moving. Somehow, I dragged myself into open air. The night sky never looked so alive. My foot was wrecked, and Charles and James had to hold me up as we stumbled to the Jeep. I couldn't drive, so James jumped in, slammed it into gear, and tore across the desert. None of us spoke. The only sound was my heartbeat and the roar of the engine. At the hospital, they gave me a tetanus shot and pulled out what felt like endless splinters. Even after everything was cleaned and wrapped, I couldn't walk right for days. And all I could think about was how close it had been. Whatever was down there wanted us, and we barely escaped. A few days later, when I could finally walk without limping too bad, James admitted he had dropped his wallet near the shaft the night we ran. He hadn't said anything then, but now he wanted to go back, just to the entrance, never inside. So the three of us drove back out there, following the pin Charles had saved. The desert looked the same, but the air felt heavier. James's wallet was nowhere to be found, but we did see something else, my shoe. It was lying a few feet from the entrance, like it had been waiting. I bent down and picked it up, and my stomach turned cold. The leather was shredded, entire chunks missing, and deep teeth marks dug across it. Not scratches, not wear, teeth. Something had chewed through my shoe. That was all the proof we needed. We didn't wait around. We left fast, and none of us ever suggested going back again. None of us have ever been able to explain what we saw or heard down there. Some people might say it was just a squatter hiding out, but if that's true, how could they survive so deep in the desert? There's no food, no water, nothing but dust and silence. And those marks on my shoe? That wasn't human. Charles told us that Instagram account stopped replying the second he messaged about what happened, and that unsettled me even more. To this day, I still wonder who or what was really waiting inside that mine. One thing's for sure, it'll be a long time before I ever think about exploring the desert again. What do you think it was? Just a person or something else entirely? I've always been the kind of guy who feels more at home under open skies than in crowded cities. To me, a real vacation means camping by a fire or fishing at dawn, not wasting money at some fancy resort. Luckily, my girlfriend of 6 months, Tiki, is the same way. Honestly, that love of nature is probably one of the biggest reasons we clicked right from the start. A couple of weeks ago, we wanted to do something different, something we'd never tried before. So instead of the usual forests, lakes, or mountains, we set our sights on the desert. Wide open, bone dry, and silent in a way that felt almost otherworldly. The thing that sealed the deal for us was the stars. Stargazing had always been our thing. We'd drive out past the edge of town, lie on the hood of my truck, and just watch the sky until we couldn't keep our eyes open anymore. This spot we found online promised skies untouched by city lights. A place far from anyone, where the stars would blaze like fire. It sounded perfect.
The listing said it was legal to camp on, nothing but raw land with a few fire rings. No noise, no people, just the desert and the stars. So we packed up the truck early that Friday morning and drove 3 hours straight into nothingness. That last hour was the strangest, just a dirt road stretching forever. No houses, no power lines, not even a sign of life. By the time we rolled up to the campsite, the sun was already sinking low, painting the land in red shadows. The place was as empty as promised. Too empty. And in that silence, I felt the first faint chill of unease crawl over me. The first couple nights were perfect. Warm days, cool nights, skies so clear it felt like we could fall into them. We'd sit by the fire with a couple drinks, pass a joint, laugh about stupid stuff, then crash in the tent after fooling around a bit. It felt good to be cut off from the world. No phones, no noise, just us in the desert. But both nights, when things went quiet, we heard something. It wasn't close, more like drifting from far out in the dark. A low, drawn-out sound, half howl, half moan. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound like any animal I knew either. And each time, the desert seemed to hold its breath until it stopped. That first night, we froze when the sound drifted over the desert. Tiki gave me a look like, "You heard that too, right?" I nodded, but we laughed it off. I joked it was just a coyote or maybe a mountain lion, and she went along with it. The same thing happened the second night, almost at the exact same time. We told ourselves it had to be normal desert wildlife, nothing more. It was creepy, yeah, but not enough to kill the mood, or so we thought. On the third night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps right outside our tent. At first it was faint, just a few soft crunches on the dry dirt, slow and deliberate, like someone trying not to be noticed. I held my breath and listened harder. This wasn't an animal. It was too steady, too human. My whole body froze. I wanted to grab the flashlight, wake Tiki, do something, but I couldn't move. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. The steps stopped only a few feet away, and then there was nothing. Just silence pressing in on me, heavy and endless. I stared at the ceiling of the tent, waiting for another sound, but it never came. I lay there frozen, praying whoever it was would just walk away. But then came a sharp flick, the unmistakable snap of a lighter. Through the thin fabric of the tent, a small orange glow appeared, waist height, only a few feet away. My stomach dropped. Someone was out there, holding a flame steady like they wanted me to see it. They waved it back and forth, slow and deliberate, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to stay silent. Then the glow grew brighter, way too bright for a lighter. It looked like they had lit a torch. My skin went cold, and before I could even process it, they let it drop. I heard the dull thud as it hit the dirt, and a second later, the tent walls flared orange. Heat rushed in, hot and violent, flames licking the fabric faster than I thought possible. In that moment, the desert night turned into a furnace, and I knew we had only seconds to escape. That was the moment I snapped out of it. I shook Tiki awake, and the second she saw the glow, she knew. We didn't have time to think. We just scrambled, tossing our gear out onto the dirt as the fire crawled across the fabric. Flames spread fast, and we barely made it out. Tiki grabbed a water jug and dumped it over the burning side, while I stomped at sparks with my bare feet, desperate to stop it. After a few frantic minutes, the fire hissed out, leaving half the tent black and shredded. My chest was heaving, my hands shaking as I grabbed the flashlight and scanned the desert around us. Someone had tried to burn us alive, but when the beam cut through the darkness, there was nothing. No footsteps, no figure, just endless silence, watching us back. Tiki didn't waste a second. She started shoving our gear together, and I followed, my hands shaking as we stuffed everything we could grab. We set off fast, trying to head toward the truck, but with no landmarks and only darkness around us, it felt like we were walking blind. After a few minutes, I knew we were turned around, every direction looking the same. 10 minutes in, the desert broke its silence. That same distant scream from the first 2 nights came again, only this time, it didn't stop. It dragged on and on, like something was being ripped apart alive. Then another scream joined in, from a different place, and then another. My blood ran cold. These weren't echoes, it was more than one thing, and they were all behind us. I didn't tell Tiki what I felt. I just grabbed her arm and pushed us forward, my heart hammering as we stumbled through the dark. By some miracle, the outline of the truck appeared, and relief hit so hard I almost collapsed. We threw our gear into the back without caring what we left behind. I floored it, headlights bouncing across the rough dirt road. Every bump and bend felt like it might flip us, but I couldn't slow down, not with those screams still carrying across the desert night.
After what felt like hours, the dirt finally gave way to pavement, and I didn't ease off the gas until headlights from other cars broke the darkness. Tiki sat beside me, holding it together, but I could see the tears building in her eyes. I tried to comfort her, but my own hands were still shaking too hard. We called the police and told them everything, though I doubt they ever found who or what was out there. What keeps me up at night is the thought that if I hadn't woken up when I did, my girlfriend and I might have burned alive in that tent, nothing but another story lost in the desert. Would you ever camp out in a place that remote after hearing this? Stick around, because the next story might be even worse. Before I get into what happened, I need to give you some context. My mom's past has always been kind of a mystery to me. She was born in Mexico and grew up in a border town before moving to the US on her own for college. From there, she built a life here, found work, met my dad, and never looked back. But whenever her childhood comes up, she shuts down. She laughs it off, cracks a joke, or changes the subject, like the past is something she's determined to bury. For years, I thought maybe it was just trauma she didn't want to relive, and my dad even told me as much. But as I got older, I started to notice how carefully she dodged questions, almost like she was hiding more than just bad memories. I remember her once joking that her father's side of the family were politicians and her mother's side were crooks, but she never said which was which. Back then, I brushed it off as dark humor. Now, I'm not so sure. I never heard her speak about her mother, not even once. The only real clue I ever had was a name. Just one letter. R. I still remember being a kid, waking up in the middle of the night to hear her whispering in the dark, repeating that name like she was talking about someone, not to them. When I flipped on the light, she ended the call instantly and gave me a look I'll never forget. She told me to go back to bed, and I did. That's all I've ever known about her life before America. One strange joke, a vague government job for her dad, and the name R. What happened to me about a year ago made all of that come flooding back. I was on a long drive through the Arizona desert, heading to see an old college buddy. Bored out of my mind, I started cycling through my contacts, calling friends, even a few girls I was talking to. Finally, I dialed my mom. We're both huge soccer fans, and once we started talking about the Champions League, it felt like any normal conversation, at least at first. Out of nowhere, two old pickup trucks were parked sideways across the road, completely blocking my path. It didn't look like an accident, more like they wanted it that way. My first thought was maybe someone needed help, so I slowed down, trying to make sense of it. My mom was still on the phone, but I didn't say a word to her yet. I pulled to a stop, my gut screaming at me to turn around. Before I could even reach for the gear shift, three men jumped out of the trucks, each one holding a gun. My body locked up. Then, in my rearview mirror, I caught headlights, another car racing up fast behind me. I had no weapon, no chance of fighting back, so doing what they said was my only option. One of the men tapped the barrel of his gun against my window and motioned for me to step out. The other two kept their distance, eyes locked on me. With my hands raised, I slowly opened the door and climbed out, trying to steady my breathing. By then, the car behind me had caught up and stopped, boxing me in completely. The man closest to me barked orders in Spanish, sharp and aggressive, but I couldn't understand a word. In that moment, my inability to speak Spanish felt like the biggest failure of my life. I'm Mexican-American, yet I stood there helpless, clueless, with no way to reason or even beg. Still, I didn't need a translator to get the point. Within minutes, my phone, wallet, and keys were ripped from me, along with anything else of value. The sinking realization hit me hard. I was about to be left stranded in the middle of the desert, cut off from everything, with no clear way out. One of the men slid into my truck, and that's when everything shifted. My stomach dropped as I remembered I had never hung up the call with my mom. The engine was still running, the phone still connected. I stared through the driver's side window as he reached for the screen, his finger hovering like he was about to end it, then pulling back as if he'd changed his mind. Instead, he just sat there, silent, listening. In that moment, the pieces clicked. My mom wasn't just on the line, she was talking to him. A few seconds later, I saw his lips move. They were having a full conversation in Spanish, words I couldn't understand, but the look on his face told me everything. This wasn't random. I swear on my life, I'm almost certain I heard him say R's name, the same one my mom had whispered years ago. It was like he was confirming it, repeating it to make sure. The other two men must have caught on, because they left their posts and came closer to the truck. The man inside rolled the window down, locked eyes with me, and spoke quickly to them in Spanish. When he finished, all three of them stared at me in silence, like they were measuring me, deciding something. My chest tightened. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. They ended the call, stepped out, and walked straight back. Without a word, they handed me everything. My phone, my keys, even my wallet. The only thing missing was the cash. One of the men glanced at me, grinned, and in a heavy accent said, "Gracias." He did it. I'd never been so relieved to lose all my cash. As I pulled away, I saw all three vehicles, including the one that had boxed me in, speeding back into the desert, vanishing without a trace. My first thought was to memorize their plates, but not a single one had any. Still shaking, I kept driving until I finally grabbed my phone and called my mom back. My voice was shaking as I demanded an explanation. She calmly told me she had threatened to call the police, that she'd been tracking my location the whole time. I knew instantly that was a lie. I pressed her again, begging for the truth about what she and those men had really talked about. She stuck to her story, swearing most of what she said in Spanish was just begging them to let me go. I didn't buy it, but what choice did I have? I asked her to call the police, and she promised she would. We hung up, and I finished the drive in total silence, too numb to process. For weeks, I tried to push it out of my head, to pretend it hadn't happened. But the more time passed, the harder it became to ignore, and the more certain I felt that my mom was hiding something terrifying.
The older I get, the more convinced I am that my mom's past isn't just shadows and trauma. It's something darker, maybe even tied to a cartel. And what terrifies me most is the idea that those ties never really ended, that they still reach into her life, and now into mine. She knows I'm not blind, yet she keeps pretending. Part of me wants to demand the truth, but the other part is scared of what that truth might cost me. Would you take that risk, or would you rather never know? If you made it this far, check out the next video for more true horror stories that will keep you up at night.